Welcome, everyone. I know folks are coming in, getting situated, getting your maybe second or third cup of coffee. I'm on two. Need to get my third here. There we go. That's what we like to see. Welcome to our first Civic and Clergy engagement for 2021. We are super excited to have members of the St. Paul School Board, our superintendent, and our omnibus person, Dana Abrams, with us. A new term I learned was your position, Dana. It was exciting to learn about that. And so I'm going to just continue to welcome folks, and we'll get started here in just a few moments. We're going to ask that the speakers will unmute themselves. And if you want to remain on mute for a while, utilize the chat box, introduce yourself, share questions there. We'll have a little interaction in the opening reflection by Reverend Blair at the beginning that you can unmute yourself for, but we'll stay on mute for most of the morning and utilize that chat box. And we'll have a little bit of a Q&A at the end. This is a very informal conversation, just kind of having coffee with the school board, kind of coffee chat. So welcome, everyone. Here comes board member Vu. So we'll get started here in just a couple moments. So welcome, and I hope you all are having a wonderful morning so far.
Great to see familiar faces. Dana, we look forward to getting to know you.
Likewise.
Yes, we run the out of school time for American Indian children in the St. Paul Public Schools. So we'd love to have our director have a chance to get to know you.
That would be great. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, we will get started here. Again, welcome. My name is Sarah Paterka, and I run Opportunity St. Paul and our congregational engagement. So I know a lot of you, and so we are excited to have you join us. We have some of our Opportunity St. Paul partners with us, faith leaders from around the city of St. Paul. We're glad you are with us, and we are excited to have you here. I'm excited to introduce my executive director, Randy Roth. She's going to give a little background on Interfaith Action and start us off with just that. So Randy, take it away.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I'll just take a few minutes because we really want to hear from the schools, but I'll start with this. Interfaith Action of Greater St. Paul believes that opportunity grows and poverty recedes when people of faith invest themselves in effective action. And so we have a program. There's 4 legs to the table. I'll touch on each one. But the program mobilizes volunteers from a diverse range of faith communities to invest themselves in work that makes a difference in our community. And we carefully screen what those work opportunities are so that people are spending their time well. And then we give the congregations an opportunity to build teamwork and put teams of their members into this work, which brings their faith to life. So the 4 legs of the table are these. The first is Project Home. You may know this. For 23 years now, we've been providing approximately 11,000 shelter bed nights a year for families with children in Ramsey County with no facility of our own. The shelter has been, the space for shelter has been 24 different houses of worship, 2 at a time, for a month at a time. And I see Project Home clergy here on this call, so they know firsthand what it's like to host. Of course, COVID changed that, and we had to move into a central location while the churches and synagogues were closed, but we hope to return to it soon. During COVID, we were able to double the number of families we serve. Our families stay an average of 43 days And in that time, our rapid exit social work team finds housing, finds job connections, education connections, increases income, and then our social work team stays with them after they are in their positive housing destination. And so, of course, a part of that is getting the kids to school while they're with us in shelter. And we work closely with the homelessness coordinators in the schools. The second leg of the table is we are the Department of Indian Work for the East Metro, the DIW for the East Metro. And we have a wide range of emergency services, including we're distributing about 310,000 pounds of food a year out of our office. We have the clothing equivalent of Food Shelf. We have a diabetes management and prevention program. But for this context, what I want to highlight is we have the American Indian Youth Enrichment Program in the St. Paul Public Schools. And so we provide the out-of-school time at Ames, the American Indian Magnet School, and have for a long time with all Native faculty. And it's an amazing program, but of course has faced COVID challenges like everything else. The third leg of the table is called Community Power Up. We work in the Black church community, kind of around the Selby Dale neighborhood, but really throughout St. Paul, to try to realize this vision. Imagine how different the community would be if everyone was fully informed about their legal rights and had their own lawyer to get all those rights enforced. Whether it's Social Security disability payments that they inappropriately got turned down for, or whether it's getting a stupid criminal conviction from when they were a teenager expunged, so it's not getting in the way of them getting jobs in apartments now, or whether it's a dog bite case. So we're working to get the education out. We used to do mass meetings, but COVID has put a crimp in that. So we now do videos on legal rights, 2-minute Facebook-friendly videos that are great. And we have legal clinic that we've kept going through COVID. And I'm an old legal aid lawyer and do clinic myself on a regular basis. And I see here churches, especially Blair's church, who are very involved in making Community Power Up happen. And the volunteer lawyers in Power Up are from the Jewish Volunteer Lawyers Association. So it's a nice interfaith thing there. And the fourth and final leg of the table is something we call Opportunity St. Paul, in which we try to find additional opportunities besides those three legs of the table for hundreds, and we hope thousands of volunteers from congregations to invest themselves in effective work. And one of the main ways we do that is through high impact literacy tutoring in the St. Paul Public Schools. Our nonprofit partners in that work are Reading Partners with us today, Eastside Learning Center with us today, and Common Bond Housing's Study Buddy program, not able to be with us today. Finally, I'll just say that a foundational piece of our work is clergy civic engagement meetings. We've heard from these clergy that we're on the front line of doing something about poverty in St. Paul that's really meaningful, but we don't have our own relationships with civic leaders. And when we call, we don't always get our phone calls returned, and we need to turn that around. So we're trying to build relationships between clergy and civic leaders, and that's why we have you here today. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Steve Marchese, who I knew through bar activities, lawyer activities. Sarah, you don't want me to do that now? After Blair? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Randy. See, we're going to just hold 1 second. We're going to introduce Reverend Blair Pogue from St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in St. Paul. She's going to open our meeting with a wonderful reflection. So Blair, you can take it away. And
Great, thank you. Thanks, Sarah, and thank you, Randy. I just so appreciate the important work that you are leading and heading up at Interfaith Action. So in a minute, a scripture passage from one of my favorite books of the Bible, Isaiah, will appear, and we're going to do something that is an important spiritual practice in my faith community, which is called dwelling in Scripture. And it's just a way of listening to Scripture. And so what I'd like to ask is, once this comes up on the screen, I'm going to read it. And then I'm going to just, while we're all muted, I'm going to just ask you to type into the chat area any words, phrases, anything that captures your imagination in this passage, or any questions that this passage raises for you. And depending on the time, which I will watch, I may just wrap it up at the end. But I think it's really important, this practice of deep listening to Scripture. So again, I will read this passage, and then let's just take some time to read it over quietly, meditatively, and share the words, phrases, images that capture our imagination, and perhaps the questions that the passage raises for you and for us. Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them and not to hide yourself from your own kin. Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. Please share any words, phrases, images that this passage raises, that ways that it speaks to you, and also questions you may have.
I think I could go first because as I was listening, because I'm so self-centered and conceited, my first reaction was to say to myself that I do all these things. And then I'm glad that I said to myself simply, but not enough. But not enough. So that's Johnny Broderick's reflection.
Thank you. And we can see these reflections also in the chat area. Again, words, images, phrases that capture your imagination. This passage, as many of you know, was believed to have been written after some of the Israelites returned to their homeland in Babylon after being in exile And the prophet is so clear here. If the people stop fighting, if there's congruence between what they believe and how they treat people in daily life, if they look outward and attend to the suffering and needs around them, their light will rise and give hope like light in the darkness. They'll be like a watered garden, an unending source of water in the desert. The ruins of their communities will be rebuilt, and they'll contribute to the foundations of many generations. And then what captured many of our imagination, they will be called the repairers of the breach, restorers of streets to live in. I think about Moses's words earlier to his community, choose life. And I wonder, how do we choose life in a time of such great political polarization? How do we address the many changes and challenges we see in our cities, state, country, and world? How do we participate in the Holy Spirit's work to rebuild relationships and infrastructure, to build affordable housing and address the complex issues behind educational disparities and make sure no one goes hungry? I think all of us here today understand that we are called not to a private faith of worship and spiritual practices that just comfort us, but to a public faith that contributes to the flourishing of the wider community and builds the foundation for a hopeful future for all children. Amen. Thank you for your beautiful reflections.
Thank you, Blair. I appreciate that. Wonderful reflections in the chat and out loud as well. So thank you for that. I will throw it back to Randy for an introduction to our speakers.
I am going to be very happy to introduce Steve Marchese, who put this together, and then ask Steve to introduce his fellow school board members and our guest, the superintendent. Steve joined the St. Paul Public Schools School Board in 2016. He and his wife, Jody, have lived in the Summit University area of St. Paul with their two sons, both students of the St. Paul Public Schools, and their dog, Isabella. In addition to serving as a school board member, Steve works as a lawyer for the Minnesota State Bar Association as the director of pro bono services, free legal services in the community. Steve was inspired to join the school board because he saw the need for engaged voices, and he saw the need for school board members who will listen and bring independent thinking to the board's work. He saw the need for school board members who would focus on equity and achievement for all students. Steve is focused on helping the board be strategic and thoughtful in its actions while focusing on equity and decision-making. He believes diversity in the district is its greatest strength, both in our student body and in our body of dedicated teachers and staff. Unfortunately for St. Paul, Steve is stepping down as of 2/28 and moving to Seattle. He was appointed by the mayor of Seattle to be director of the Office of Labor Standards for the city of Seattle. St. Paul's loss and Seattle's gain. Thanks so much for doing this, Steve. Can you introduce your fellow panelists?
Thank you so much, Randy, for your kind introduction and good words. And it's great to be here with all of you this morning. This is, as Randy mentioned, my last week of service on the St. Paul School Board. It's been an important and really meaningful journey. It's been an honor and a privilege to be a part of the board and to be able to serve this community that has been our home for 20 years and that we've raised our sons in almost all the way through St. Paul Public Schools. My younger son is going to graduate from Central High School in June. So we are still a St. Paul Public School family for several more months, although, as I said at our last board meeting on Tuesday night, we'll always be St. Paul Public School parents because this is the district that raised and nurtured our sons, and that is incredibly meaning wherever we live. And so I'm very pleased that Randy and Sarah approached me to do this. I also wanted to make sure that one of the goals that you have is relationship building. And since I am only days away from leaving my service, I wanted to make sure that you also met with and heard from both some of my colleagues on the school board who will be remaining and working on the board and have been working very actively on the board, and then also to meet with the superintendent and members of his administration. So I'm pleased to introduce my colleagues and also to let them talk a little bit as well. I'm going to start with my board colleagues. John Broderick, who you just heard from before, is our elder statesperson on the board. He's been on the board since 2002 when he started. So it's been 20 years almost since he's been on the board. And John is someone who's mentored me as a board member and has helped me, guide me as I've learned to be a board member. And we supported each other over these last 5 and some years. He's a former school teacher, taught high school and also lifelong community resident. If you want to know where the bodies are buried in St. Paul, John knows where they are. And he also knows everybody in St. Paul almost, so it's amazing. And then I also want to introduce Jim Vu, who is our newest board member and also our current vice chair. Jim is a parent of 4 children in the district, has been very involved in the Hmong community on the east side, in the Hmong Parent Advisory Committee, in his community for many years. He brings a really important and I think needed voice to the work that we're doing on the board. And he replaced, as an interim appointment, our departed former chair, Marnie Zhang, and to use the phrase in Judaism of blessed memory, and who sadly was taken from us during COVID in June. But Jim has been bringing his own voice and his own actions and his own thoughts, and I really have appreciated working with him, and he will be the future of this board. I also want to introduce our superintendent, who I hope many of you have seen and heard from over the last 3.5 years since he came to St. Paul from Burnsville. We are very, very, very fortunate to have brought him to St. Paul. He's been working tirelessly from day one. This is not an easy job. I think few people realize how hard it is to run a district of the size, scale, and scope of a district like St. Paul. Joe is someone who never lets you see him sweat. He gets it done. He does it in a thoughtful, diligent, clear, communicative manner. He's a straight shooter, and he is committed, I know, deeply to the principles of equity that I care about, that my colleagues care about, that I know animates a lot of the work that you all are doing. And I'm excited to have him talk about the work that this district has been doing, particularly in the crisis that we have been in for almost the last year. And then I also want to introduce Dana Abrams, who also is someone with long history here in the community. She is the ombudsperson for our district. She's the person that many parents reach out to as first point of contact when they have concerns and issues with the district. She's always been a compassionate and really thoughtful voice. She's committed to this community. She always makes time for people. She's another one like John Broderick, where she knows everybody too. I mean, honestly, going to a fair and being there with any of these folks is like old home week. It's amazing. But I've really appreciated Dana as a colleague at the administration and have always enjoyed spending time with her and learning from her as she's navigated this district, particularly on behalf of our parents. So I want to turn it over first to the superintendent, because I think he can lay out for everybody sort of the journey that we've been on as a district. That will probably parallel what you've already seen and heard in the media, but I think is important to hear from his perspective and the ways we're trying to address the issues that the pandemic has brought up, issues around equity, issues around learning models, our concerns about how our students are faring during this time and some of the choices that he's made over this period of time. And then afterwards, perhaps we can hear briefly from my colleagues, from Dana, and then answer questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. Director Marchese, it's so strange to think of this time of year you're going to be leaving. Normally that happens in the fall after elections and things like that. But Steve has been a great board member, friend, and colleague. And what I shared Tuesday night at the end of a very long meeting was that his very direct feedback, many times by a superintendent, can be met with resistance or kind of that feeling of inferiority. But Steve always did it in a very deliberate, supportive way. And I always appreciated that about him, not one to just point out faults, but to offer solutions and to offer willingness to step in and help. And he's really made me better as a leader, as a person, and I'll really miss him and know that he'll do great work in Seattle, that's for sure. And not an easy place to go. He knows I've been following their work a little bit as they're going through many transitions as well. So best to you, Steve. I also want to point out that Dana Abrams, in addition to being a great mother and grandmother and friend here in St. Paul, she's also our assistant director in family engagement. So ombudsperson is a, we do this and I come from Madison, and I had many promotions in 18 years in Madison, my home district. And I found myself at the end of my career as the assistant superintendent overseeing secondary schools. There was no chain of command or a staff list. You called Joe. You called Joe for everything because I knew everyone. Dana very much is that way for us. We know when there's really complex problems to help, to understand, to empathize, and to provide direction. Dana is certainly a great person to have in that position, but we also saw a void. I did when I came here in terms of some of the other components of our district in terms of Title IX, and making sure that we're looking at Title IX as not just a place where somebody gets in trouble or files a report, but where we can have real education behind Title IX. What is the purpose of this, and how can the community, our staff, our students and families understand it? So Dana is leading that as the coordinator of Title IX in the district too. We've created a new structure to make sure that isn't just work you go to, again, because someone's in trouble. We really use it as an educational institution, as a way to help guide our community so we can avoid and so we can inform and stay out of some of those very, very challenging situations. So I wanted to offer that. I think for me to begin today, and I'll try to be very brief, of course, to say, give us an update on what's going on. I can share with you the last hour, or I think it's important for me to share with you the last 366 days. That's an important number. And I can't remember if it was a leap year or not, so I could be off a day, but I think you'll understand. Tomorrow represents a day that I hope I don't have to ever live again. On February 26, 2020, I received from the State Bureau of Mediation Services a letter of intent to strike by the St. Paul Federation of Educators. Of course, we had been working through negotiations and trying to avoid, that letter, that action, but it didn't work out. I remember receiving the letter. I remember having the communication in place, and I remember calling my board colleagues and telling them with disappointment, I couldn't get us across the line to avoid this. We've got 10 days or 15 days to work this out. We're going to come through. And we didn't. And not only did we have a strike and weather a strike, but we were also pulled back to the table and pulled into an agreement because of COVID-19. And I remember working through the strike, honestly, many times you hear people say 24 hours a day. This was really 24 hours a day. And I remember reading about King County, where Steve's going. There was a major outbreak, and I'm a science teacher by background, I should share with you as well. So I'm always very interested in topics like this as they develop, not just from my work, but because I really do have an interest in it as well. And King County had an outbreak in one of their long-term care facilities that led to, a lot of international news, quite honestly. And soon enough, I had connected with a superintendent colleague in King County in the Highline School District, and was asking her what's going on. And I really saw them as the group ahead for a while anyway, where, they were making decisions, and I saw, it's a similar place to St. Paul. We have to begin to prepare for what they're going through here. It was only a matter of time. And of course, Governor Walz made it pretty clear as well in meeting with me directly and members of our negotiations team that, guys, we've got this coming. You got to get your contract settled. So we did. And we immediately went into, and I remember this because it was 4:30 in the morning when we came to agreement. It was 10 o'clock that same morning where we had a press conference to share with the community what, that the strike is settled. And it was upstairs here in our office at about 11:30 that day, where I said goodbye to my board members. All board members were there, and didn't see them again. And of course, our former chair, Shong, never saw her again And we departed, cleared the office, and away we went to work. We're going to do SPPS and meet the needs of our community virtually. And it has been the ultimate challenge. It has been, and there's been some really good things in it too, because you learn a lot about yourselves in a crisis. You learn a lot, and I talk to our teams a lot about stress tests, and we have lots of them, where you have to push it as far as you can to understand where are our vulnerabilities and our weaknesses, so we can make sure that as we continue this or as we push this out, that we are ready. I won't go through the whole 366 days, only to share with you that we are in a far better place today than we've been in a long time, just in terms of COVID in the community. You might know that the Minnesota Department of Health shares every Thursday since July 30th a case rate by county by 10,000 or per 10,000 people. So that is a number that we've become very attuned to and looking at to understand what the community spread of COVID-19 is in our community. That number got as high as 133 in December, and I should share with you that that number is correlated to a recommended learning model of distance learning, hybrid learning, or full in-person learning. The governor has backed off on that somewhat, but again, being somebody, and board members know this, who is very committed to data, it's something that I look at and chart every single day. And I'm looking at understanding what is COVID doing in our community. And that's not perfect. We know that the data is one thing, but there are still people who are impacted by COVID that are the outliers or the unexplained, or we really don't have an answer for. So I know that in coming to you today, that there are still, that we're at great risk in our communities for COVID. And I think we have to be real about that. But we have come down. And I made the decision in December following the governor's order, or the governor's revision and updated guidance, to say we've got to get our elementary students back in person if they choose. And I did that for a number of reasons. Number one, and these aren't always the things that are in newspaper articles or that we're able to express in a Zoom call, but I participated in many specific groups and individual meetings with parents and families and even students. I have a 10th grade student in the district who we've gotten very close during this time, a young black girl at Como Park, who was an AB student taking advanced classes. And she has been on my case the entire year about improving what we're doing. And I'm so grateful that I, on a Saturday morning, had a one-on-one with her and have struck a really important relationship, I think, for both of us. And she's ready to give up. She's ready to give up and has been for some time. And, continue to find ways to support her and a younger brother, a single mom who's working. This is not the single story in St. Paul, but I think it's a very common story. I think it's one that that I can, with great, with pretty good confidence, say there's a number of families who are experiencing it in a very similar way, not the same, but a very similar way. So we've looked for ways the entire time to try to address some of the supports that are necessary. We did that by establishing some academic support centers at Washington Tech for a number of weeks. We held drop-in sessions where students could get support from volunteers and from staff here in SPPS on their distance learning. And we've done this in ways that now we have our buildings back open, our secondary buildings, for support as well, on-site, in-person support. And the reports that we get back from students are, there's just a different feeling walking through a building. There's a structure and an expectation, there's support. Of course, they can get questions answered, but something really important to me, and I hope is important to you as well, I get to see other people. I get to see other people. And honestly, it could be just about anyone for many of our students, but for them to see their peers face to face has been really powerful. And it's always a very highlighted feedback loop that I get back from staff who are in those centers and working with our students. So it's been incredibly challenging. You also likely know that in October, we released data on how our students were doing. And of course, this is more of a high school data point in terms of the number of students receiving failing non-passing grades. It was very high, almost double across the board for just about every group that you can break down. And we saw that as a true breakdown of how distance learning just does not serve students or staff in the way that education is designed to be delivered. For some, it's just fine. I should mention I have a senior son in the district as well. classmate of Ethan's at Central. Our youngest is graduating this year as well. And for him and many of his friends, it's working just fine, although fine you could define that many ways. But for some of our students, it just is not at all working out. And I was talking to a mother early in the school year, and she said, "Superintendent, I'm going to school myself. My child is 5 and can't read yet. And everything we do in distance learning is almost 100% text dependent. I mean, it really is. There's some auditory things that you can do, of course, and recording lessons and that. But a lot of the follow-up, connect with the teacher, it's text, email, text, or some of the platforms that we have in Seesaw and Schoology gives you the ability to do that. So the idea that we're serving school-dependent learners, which in SPPS, I believe we have a number of school-dependent learners for a lot of different reasons. It just makes distance learning that much more difficult, and in some cases impossible. And I told our team all along when developing this is a year ago almost now, I remember these words: we need students to connect, to access, to engage, and to achieve. And you can't have achieve without those other three. Obviously, getting devices in hands is one thing. Making sure that there's connection and access into Schoology and Seesaw and other learning materials, that's important too. There's got to be engagement. Students have to understand what's expected of them and understand that there is support for them to achieve learning goals. And of course, achievement is determined on how successful we are with those three. I try to get our team away from attendance and assignments and deadlines and really think about those 4 broad themes of our approach to distance learning. Because I think we go right into the position of, we're just going to do school how we did it. It's just going to be on their own. And that isn't a successful way to go about it. I have had a number of community partners reach out to me during the last year to say, how can we help? Of course, that's been really difficult to establish virtual help, for learning, that is, without being in person. So I haven't really had great answers for that. I think that it will get better. I think as vaccinations and I think as case rates continue to decline, I think there will be some opportunities, but for right now, we're trying to keep our schools as controlled and as few ins and outs as possible. So, and even parents dropping students off, first time parents, school age parents not walking their kid into school was painful, but it was really necessary for our protocols, a few weeks ago and continued as we move forward. You might be thinking about, well, what about summer? And I've thought a lot about summer too. And there are a few things I can share with you about summer that I think are opportunities, but I have great concerns as well. One, we know that there are a number of students who need something in the summer, either credit recovery, enrichment, because perhaps they haven't been challenged, or just that place to go and connect. And some of the specific interventions that might be needed to make up for some of the lost learning. And I think that's true. But we also have a staff in this last 365 days who have worked in ways that they never have. And you can say what you want about the efficacy of distance learning. Our staff are absolutely fried. They just are. And every decision I make has a cause and effect, right? And even though the board has given me the authority to make those decisions, I do understand. I've been a classroom teacher. I've been an educational assistant. I've been a principal and an assistant superintendent. I understand the layers of decisions in this office and how it impacts the people in the organization. So I have to be real about that. In that, we may not have the number of teachers who in the past said, hey, I'm ready to come back right away in the summer, be ready to do that. So I have to look into the community to find different ways, different people, and different methods of reaching out and developing some of these really important connections that I have, or that we need. So we're working with some of our community groups right now to start to stand up and get people ready for what that might look like. Details might not be there yet, but at least organizing and getting people, organizations, and groups ready to step in and to serve, I think is going to be really important as we move forward. So I do look forward to, I might not have details today, but that would be something that we can continue to partner on as we move forward in the coming weeks. I won't say months, because obviously the planning that's necessary for that. We are going to be making a decision about when 6 through 12 return. There are many districts across the metro that have made that determination. I get a lot of pushback about, well, why is it different in St. Paul Public Schools? Well, I can tell you this much: until you're in this seat, you have no idea the systems that we have in place. It really isn't about our kids and our families. It's just about the systems we have in place to coordinate to make sure that we can do things effectively and safely. And it's really a challenge, everyone. It really is, when you have something like a communicable disease, where we've been able to vaccinate a whole bunch of staff, but not all. And we haven't been, obviously, vaccines have not been offered to families or to students. So there are a lot of, really great concerns that we have in terms of how we're going to move forward effectively. So I'm trying to give just a 30,000 foot view on really what's top of mind for me. I would be happy, or allow board members or Ms. Abrams to go into any more details that you would like at this time that I can. I'm also willing to do follow-up meetings with the group or with any of you individually if there's additional information or partnership support or questions that you might have.
Thanks so much, Superintendent. I appreciate you giving everybody the overview. Maybe what might make sense is for maybe Ms. Abrams, you can talk a little bit sort of the way that the district is trying to reach out to community and to our parent communities, and some of the engagement work that's being done, that's been done around feedback and providing feedback to the district about needs and maybe services and just general issues that have come up.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, within the Office of Family Engagement, we have different leaders who are responsible for our parent advisory councils. We have culturally specific groups. We also have a special ed group. And then we're also just a place where folks come when they need answers to the questions that they have. So one of our biggest goals is, as we are receiving information, we are getting it out to our leaders, our PAC leaders, so that they can funnel that information out to parents. We are connecting with community partners who are working with our same students, because we're sharing the same students. And we need to be on the same page with regard to getting information to them so that everybody is on the same page. So connecting with partners like Boys and Girls Club, the Sane Foundation, the Y, just so that they can get the same message out that we are, so that we're on the same page. So is it challenging? Absolutely. Are we using social media to get words out? Absolutely. Is it enough? No. So every day we are trying to figure out ways that we can get information out to folks that's going to meet them. There's no use in blasting information out if people aren't going to get it. And so through our PAC groups, through social media, through our community partners, through faith-based folks too. And I'm really excited because I need to connect with somebody to get an updated list that we can share with giving like information blasts out to. That would be great. So those are some of the ways that we're trying to get information out to parents. Fortunately, within the Office of Family Engagement, folks come back to us because they know we care about our families. They know. So people will come back to us and say, hey, what's going on with this? So we have also helped teach some of our parents to be empowered so that they can share the word with other parents. I believe in that each one reach one. So if we are able to give somebody else information, they may be able to share that with somebody who doesn't know how to get in touch with us, who doesn't belong to one of our PAC groups, or who may not be social media savvy. So I hope that answers.
Okay. Thanks so much, Ms. Abrams. Thank you, Dana. I want to give my board colleagues a chance just to talk maybe for a few minutes about just some of the challenges, and then also some of your hopes, perhaps, as we are moving forward in this next segment of time and where we're going with that. Maybe start briefly with my colleague, Director Broderick, and then Director Vu, who can maybe also share his own perspective.
All right, and I'll step completely out of character and be very, very brief because I want to listen more than talk, but I do need to say a couple thank yous. First of all, Joe Gothard's narration about this last year was very, very good, outstanding, and I hope that you felt that it was hopeful because I know he's working so hard so that we can have this faith and hope in the path that we're going down or that we're going up. So thank you, Joe, for that. Thanks, Steve, for putting this together. Thank you to this organization. You know, I was introduced by Alona Street Stewart and her husband, David, to this organization years ago, and Grant Abbott, and I've been in your building so many times, and this is just dear to my heart, so thank you very much. I think this type of ecumenical movement is just what St. Paul really needs right now. We need to come together. We need to come together. And I always tease Joe Gothard that sometimes he probably thinks I'm trying to run for Pope here. But you know what? I think we have to tell each other these kinds of things once in a while. So I thanked, Dana Abrams. Yes, she's been a part of this community her entire life. Her mom and her dad, Doc Abrams, were absolute icons in this community. And so I knew the name Abrams before I knew Dana. So thank you, Dana. You are great. And as far as Steve, I can't resist because I didn't get an opportunity to say as much as I would have liked to have said about Steve. And now February 28th is coming. Steve has gone from Queens, New York. He helped me with that. Queens, New York. But by the way, you Minnesotans, it's not the Queens, it's Queens. Right, Steve? Queens, New York, son of a truck driver, commutes to Manhattan for Stuyvesant High School, onward to Yale, back to New York University, NYU for his law degree. Then he finds his way here to St. Paul, where he raises his family and stays for around 20 years and is a big civic leader and has served so well on this St. Paul school board. And now he's on his way to Seattle, where I know he will have an impact because people like Steve always do. So you talk about a story of Americana. Italian boy from Queens, son of a truck driver, teamster, finds his way to the Midwest, and now he's going to the West Coast. In about 50 years, they're going to be singing songs about him. I wish I'd be around then, but I don't think I will be, Steve. I'm going to miss you. St. Paul's going to miss you. This school board's going to miss you. And one of the things that Gothard said is that Steve can put things in a way that is so diplomatic and is so well stated and yet pointed. And Steve, I'm mostly going to miss you because you try to help me out like that when I'm trying to say something. So Steve, Godspeed. And to this group, you're probably going to say that Broderick doesn't keep his promises. He was going to be brief. 10-4.
All right, I will try to be brief. Thank you, Director Broderick. My name is Jim Vu, Vice Chair, St. Paul Public Schools. Happy to be here. I think I'm just going to speak from this perspectives that I think is most helpful for our group here. You know, as a new board member, I'm looking forward to building opportunities with members in our community who makes up community and how we can partner. Part of the reasons why and looking forward to our work together. You know, as a Hmong parent in the community, Superintendent Gothard talked about all the challenges over the last 367 days or so. And just think about the communication that has to come between now and then, and think about all the challenges that are already has happened. And in my community, not everybody speaks English as a first language. So you add that as another layer of challenge, and our community just doesn't get the information that everybody else is getting at the speed at which everybody else is getting. And that's sort of my focus, my immediate focus going forward. I can give you an example. Back in December, the Hmong community had a town hall meeting around COVID-19. This is when the county case rates were really high. There was no indication that it was going to go down. Some of the concerns that my community was talking about, the questions that they were asking were questions that non-Hmong communities were asking back in the end of the spring or the beginning of the summer. And I'm just thinking to myself, you know, we should know some of this stuff already. We shouldn't be asking the questions that we are. We should be maybe asking more in-depth questions about impacts going forward, not just, you know, learning firsthand about mitigation issues, mitigation practices that other communities have learned months before. And that's really the basis of forming these relationships with everybody in the community, to get an understanding of where and how we are all connected, and how we can sort of use our assets to bring out this information to the people who need it the most.
Thank you, Jim.
So I want to make sure that, you know, if we have an opportunity to have questions, discussion about some of the things that are going on. I know we've tried to keep it sort of at a little bit of a higher level, but I also know that all of you and all of your organizations do connect through your congregants, members of your community, personally, through your professional or relationships with other organizations, to our students, and have questions, or I know that part of this also is relationship building. And so, you know, essential to that is dialogue. So I don't want this to be, you know, a monologue from people connected to St. Paul Public Schools. I want this also to be a conversation. So maybe we can open it up for some discussion, questions that folks might have, and maybe is the easiest, maybe Sarah, for people to raise their hand or put something in chat. I'll let you kind of make the technical decision on that.
That sounds great, Steve. Thank you. And thank you all of the directors and Superintendent Gothard and Miss Abrams. It's been wonderful to learn. I've been scribbling notes here next to me. Feel free to use the chat, or you can raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. I'll keep an eye on it. I want to take 1 minute to just quick welcome our board chair, who is with us today too, Bill Brady. He is a constant support of Interfaith Action and the work that we do. He has been with us at all of our civic engagement roundtables. And I just want to thank Bill for being with us today. So it's just great to be able to have that board support with us as well. So feel free to raise your hand. Randy, I saw you first. And thanks, Bill, for saying hi.
Thanks. I'm going to queue up a series of questions about literacy programs. So one of the key areas of work in our organization is partnering with reading partners. The director is here, Eastside Learning, the director is here, and Common Bond Housing, which serves St. Paul Public School students, but in their homes, not at school, to do high impact literacy tutoring. And I'll confess a personal interest in it, in that my daughter served as the site coordinator at the Hmong Magnet School for quite some time and was very, very devoted to the work. And I tutored there and came to know it very well. Obviously, COVID blows everything up, but we're trying to get back to business. How do you see the future of these literacy programs in the schools unfolding as we are responding to this phase of COVID? And I'm inviting Brooke, the Director of Reading Partners, and Chris, the Director of Eastside Learning, to add to the question if they'd like, or just keep the discussion going.
Right, and I know Brooke and I have met as well. Good to see you today, Brooke. I think that we know that the need is there, and I think what we're going to need to look at is developing small groups of students with, the appropriate staff, support, volunteers, partners around them. That's a different way that I want to really look at summer school. We may not be able to do a traditional summer school, and we might also argue that traditional summer school hasn't always been as effective as it could be. So is there a way that we could almost have this 1-to-3, 1-to-5 ratio with, the folks that you mentioned and have worked with, Randy and Brooke, and really look at that as a very different summer model where we are strictly looking at the growth of those 3 to 5 individuals. And that's it. That's the focus. And, that's an idea that I've begun to share with our team. I took this to Generation Next and to Dean Campbell at St. Thomas to begin looking out at pre-teachers and other volunteers who might be ready to do this kind of work. So that's just to give you one example of how I'm looking at it. I don't want to go by the script that we've always used, because it hasn't always been effective, and because of what I mentioned previously about my fear of our workforce and not having it.
Could I just add, I guess maybe a little bit of a hopeful note regarding what's happened with distance learning, at least as far as my volunteer work is concerned. I am a study buddy through the Opportunity St. Paul, but through the Common Bonds, and I have a couple of kids at the Westminster Housing Project, and we've had to switch to distance learning or Zoom tutoring. And it is actually for at least, I don't know if this is representative, but for me, it has actually been a really cool experience with this kid. In the past, we've been in a big room with like 4 or 5 other study buddies and their tutors, and there were a lot of distractions. It was hard to keep her focused. And it's actually been easier now with, it's just her and I in a chat room, and we read the book together. And what's really cool is that, like yesterday we read a book about volcanoes. And so, I was trying to explain an eruption to her. And then I said, well, why don't we just look at one? And then, we just went on and went online, and she said, oh, that's what you're talking about, and it was actually quite engaging. And I hope she feels the same way. And I'm not saying that this, that this means, distance learning is the way to go, but there are some advantages to it. And I hope we maybe can keep some of those in mind when all of this is over. That's just, I want to talk about my experience there.
Thank you. I'm so happy. First of all, thank you for your volunteerism. It's great. And to know that it has become effective, I think is outstanding. I do think we've learned enough in this last year that there are elements of distance learning, of how we've approached this pandemic, that are likely to stay. I would imagine we will do far more of these in the future than we have in the past, for example. Not because we have to, but because people show up and people are engaged, and it's been a pretty effective way to cut down on travel. The other thing that I have to keep in mind is that our students coming to a physical school, there's so much more than just, the literacy or the math or the topic. There are the social emotional supports, the food, and the health services that we can provide in person, that I think we have to look at as well and be a companion to that. So even if we do remain in some sort of Zoom or Teams or whatever the platform is, that having students physically present does serve such an important need as well. So it could be a hybrid type schedule that we look at summer school very differently in that way as well. that we continue to do some of the academic programming online. But we do need our students physically to be present to receive some of the support and services that they need.
Chris, do you want to ask your question or would you like me to? I can do that for you. Chris put in the chat, as a nonprofit, she is the executive director of Eastside Learning Center that supports children's literacy. She's wondering, how can we best support your students and families?
You know, Ms. Abrams, if you have thoughts on how family engagement engages with our nonprofits and opportunities that we have in the past, but we're likely to be looking at for the future based on, you know, this period of time, if you want to share, that would be great.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. First of all, we are always welcoming of other partners to come in and support. And I'm not going to say your statement said your students. I'm going to say they're all of our students, because I don't care where they come from. They're all of ours. And we will welcome any opportunity to shape or form some kind of partnership from an organization that's willing and able and wants to do it. I think it's about sitting down and talking about what's most effective, because we, again, are not doing business as usual. Things have changed, obviously, in this last year. And so I think it's about sitting down and talking about what's the greatest need and how we can meet that need. So I don't want to be presumptuous and just say, oh, we can do X, Y, and Z, when X, Y, and Z has turned to ABC now and is very different. And so just to have the conversation so that we are intentional and focused on what's going to really bring out the best for our students. And so to be able to say, give an exact answer right now, I don't think I could say what we used to do, right? But we're at a different place now. But what I can just reiterate is that community partners, we always are looking for community partners, especially ones who have that direct impact on student learning. And so I would welcome the opportunity to have a further discussion offline off of this to make that happen.
I will also add, thank you, Dana, that you know, some of you might read about CARES Act funding, the federal funds that are coming into states, and then school districts get a portion of those funds. Well, there are 3 packages right now that have either been distributed or that are in discussion. We're on the second one right now. We've received the first package. There is still a finalization and a certification process for the second package. And then President Biden and his administration right now are debating the third. You might read about that or see some of the flare-ups from that package as well. And these are long-term, some long-range funds as well. And at first they were needed for masks and PPE and this and that and the other thing. And we've got funds for those things. This middle package that we're waiting for certification is really aimed at student support. So what ways can we be creative around supporting the questions that you're asking? So I want to say that we are also going to be looking at increasing the amount of funds we have available to support our students, socially, emotionally, academically, in any way that we can. And not just for the summer, not just for this year, but moving forward as well. Some of these funds, you know, that they have to be used by 22, 23. So it really is looking at, you know, stimulus for districts over, you know, the time to recover and reimagine, as I like to call it, from this period of time.
I've got Brooke on tap, and then we'll go to Blair, and then we'll jump up to Randy. So Brooke.
Well, thank you again for this time. It's fantastic to hear from you leaders, especially in St. Paul. I'm the executive director of Reading Partners, and my question is around, similar to Chris's question around stepping alongside families. Our program, we've gone completely virtual. We have a really robust curriculum that is administered virtual. We actually just looked at our mid-year results. We're actually at we're on par with results as we were last year, right before everything went crazy. And so we're really encouraged by that. Where we've struggled is actually, we have more volunteers than students right now. And I completely understand COVID fatigue, screen fatigue, all of that, but we're ready, we're poised, and we want to serve more students. And so I guess my question is really how can we be partners with schools and teachers? I think burnout is an absolutely real thing. but how can we bring what we have to more students in the immediate, and then also looking ahead to next year? We want to come back strong, and we want to come back ready to go, and we're working to get those volunteers ready, and we're working also to be ready. If we're in person, we're in person. If we're distance, we're distance. Or if we're hybrid. We can do it all, and we really want to make sure that we can connect the resources that we have to students.
Thank you, Brooke. I think that's key right there, is being flexible as much as possible. And I think key in that is understanding how we can best meet our students. So we have, through surveys, many students who are choosing, I want virtual learning. And it might be for a few reasons. It might be safety, and it might be because, like you said, and like Bill said, it's really working. And if that's the case, then we want to know that so that we can, individualize, personalize that student's opportunity. If there are students in the middle who really don't know, then I think it's about informing what kind of information can we provide that will be helpful so that students and families understand opportunities that are available. And if it's students and families who we identify or who self-identify that need that in person, then being able to make that match as well. So to me, it's about understanding the needs of our students and families and then working together to coordinate that. We have a ton of data. We collect more data on our students and what they want, how it's working. We did do I have it right in front of me? We have a distance learning survey research that we did. We conducted research on our own efficacy of distance learning that I could share with you as well. I don't know if it's public yet, but I can share that with the group once it is. So we have a lot of that information, and I would be willing to work and allow our district to work with our partners in that way.
Awesome. Thank you. Blair.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the work you're doing. I know all of you leaders tend to hear more of the criticism than the praise, but thank you. I have two questions, and I think they're related. The first is, I have a lot of teachers who teach in Minneapolis and St. Paul in my congregation, as well as people who have done mentoring and tutoring, some online. And they have been very concerned about the students who've kind of gone missing and dropped out. And I know I have one woman who was a public school teacher in Minneapolis and then was working as a tutor, and she's been trying to track down families, and it's been so hard. And I wondered about that. That must be overwhelming, but what's going on to kind of find the kids who have gone missing. And then the second piece is, I'm seeing that I've been calling my elders, and almost all of them have been vaccinated now, and they're ready to serve, and they're just so tired of being isolated. They want their lives to have meaning. They want to make a difference. So I wonder, it's so hard in the church, everything keeps shifting. It's hard to have these plans, but I'm wondering, with all the people who are now getting vaccinated, it's starting to move, kind of what does that open up in terms of volunteer opportunities?
Sure. Let's, and Dana, certainly contribute to the volunteer question. And maybe I'll say that one for a second. So I'll start back at the beginning. Tracking students down, you're looking at a former high school assistant principal of a high school very similar to our high schools here in St. Paul. And I loved every minute of it. It was my alma mater. This time of year as an assistant principal, even on our best years, on the sunniest and brightest days, we were tracking students down. Students who were disengaged, who were giving up. And it was always very challenging for all the reasons we could spend days talking about. That has only been exacerbated and widened, during the pandemic. And you're right, you heard me say connect, engage, access, and achieve. And the connection piece has been really hard. Even as our mobile units were going out and taking iPads and hotspots and addressing connection issues in households, there were many students and families who just didn't even engage with us to get the device. So connection is pretty hard if that level of engagement isn't taking place. So what we did, we found out a few things. One, we sent people out to knock on doors. And we even found, that this shouldn't be a surprise, that we had some of our security staff go in doing that and dressed in their soft uniforms, were met very differently than when one of the members was told that. She went back the next day in more of her cultural dress, and the results were astonishing. So this is a time of just great distrust of so much. that we have to get on a human element and establish that connection before education is going to take place. And I think that part has been long been a struggle, and I think it's only widened right now. So looking at ways that we can approach our communities in a cultural responsive way has been a really big challenge, and not just language, just in terms of what my family looks like and has been impacted by COVID-19. So, I think individualizing that to the best of our abilities and making sure that I am providing resources for staff to be individualized and get out into the community as much as possible is really helpful. Believe it or not, well, you would believe it, but our meals program that delivered over 16 million meals was probably our best effort in this, because families, even during the height of the pandemic, had a daily interaction. My bus driver became someone I talked to, at least once a week, if not more. And that was pretty powerful to hear, and how much pride our bus drivers took during this time of delivering love, to our community was a great success, and something that you should be proud of this community. It's certainly not me, but the many people who are responsible for what they did in terms of serving food to the community as a model that could be replicated around the country. Dana, you want to talk a little bit about the, I've lost my train of thought on it. I'm sorry, if you could.
I was gonna add something else too. As you mentioned, the students who we can't find, in addition to I know across the district, I know within the Office of Family Engagement that we have reached out, we have called relatives, we have gone door knocking, it's probably easier to find a whole family than it is a population that's always getting missed. And that's our 14 to 20-year-olds who are the kids on their own, or the kids who are disconnected from families. And so we do have, with our school attendance team, who we have a person who goes out looking specifically for those older kids who usually fall through the cracks. And so we're trying to catch them. We're trying not to let them fall through. So that Mr. Green is going to places like Listening House in downtown, going to wherever youth hang out that are on their own. And so trying to get connected, and he's been finding them. I'm like, where do you look? And then I was like, you know what? It works for you. I'm gonna let you keep doing you. But we've been finding folks. Now, are we finding everybody? No. Can we always do better? Absolutely. But to know that it is a big concern. If I talk to a student, a school, and have said, have you guys been able to find this family? What do we need to do to help you? Because the Office of Family Engagement, like I said, again, was trying to help schools locate families and that whole thing. And what I can tell you is that our schools have been on it. They were like, we've done this, and this. And it was like, whoa, okay. Not that I doubted it, but with so much going on at one time, to know that they had gone those extra steps. Again, is it perfect? Absolutely not. Are we learning new ways to reach people? Yes. But the looking and trying to find families, trying to find out, did they move to another district? That's been a priority, because we know that they're out there, folks out there, kids out there, families out there, and we are doing what we can to try to reach them. So if you guys have any other ideas, we are welcome to those as well. We do not know it all and never claim to. So if you have suggestions, we are open to them.
And Blair, I would just say with the volunteers, I think the biggest challenge for us is we're still new into being back in person. So really trying to establish rituals, routines, protocols in place, and understanding that for every individual we introduce into our environments, that's another contact to be traced if there is a case. So it's just trying to minimize the amount of people we're introducing in and out, and just trying to make sure that we have a firm grasp of that. So I don't want to rule it out, but at this point, working with our Director of Health and Wellness, that's been a pretty big operation these last 4 weeks to keep our building safe, and if cases do arise, to get them isolated and to get the proper guidance out to those who.
Thank you. Yeah, vaccine volunteers. We have very anxious faith-based volunteers who want to get out there. So it's hard to tell them to be patient.
No.
It's hard. So Randy, your question is next.
Just before I ask my question, I just want to make sure we responded fully to Blair's question about what are the ways we might imagine being able to use volunteers in the next X months, the rest of this school year. I understand it'll probably be different in the fall. Is there anything more on that? And then I'm going to go to parent engagement in a second.
Randy, I would have to say that I think it would depend on the efforts, who's leading it. As great as welcoming and as much as our community cares, right now we are having a heck of a time supporting our organization just internally. So it's not out of, and it's not out of lack of, we don't care, we're not listening, we're not open arms. It's just establishing what is our continuity of services and what's the right time to expand that. So I would imagine I'm going to bring this conversation back to our senior leadership team that I meet with twice a week, and make sure that they understand there's a real desire for that. Ms. Abrams will also take it back to the family engagement team, strategic partnerships team, and begin discussions so that we can communicate more fluently with you all in our community what those opportunities are and when they might start.
I thank you so much for those comments. I totally get it. I applaud your efforts. It's a miracle that we're even in the buildings. I get that. And I'm going to encourage us to think outside the box of our traditional kinds of volunteer work. And like one teeny idea, like I've watched my daughter go through leaving the Hmong magnet school, and she left on the first day of the strike. And the kids were saying, I'm never going to see you again. I love you. I'm never going to see you again. She's not going to see you in 2 weeks. And then it's been over. If they could even write a letter to those kids, and reconnect and say, I still care about you and I still have your artwork on my wall, they'd feel like they could repair something that was broken for reasons outside of all of our control. And our volunteers are just chomping at the bit to do something. So if there's something COVID safe that's repairing, let us know. I'm going to go to Blair, and then I'm going to go back to parent engagement if we have time.
I get how I appreciate all of your answers so much. I can't even imagine. It's just been overwhelming in my church of 300 people. I can't even imagine for a school district. So thank you for everything you and others have done. I just watched a member of my church who stayed in touch with a family that was homeless, 4 kids, 1 on the way. They were with us through Project Home, and they wanted to stay in touch. And my volunteer really understood this as a 2-way relationship. That family just got housing. She walked with them appropriately for 2 years and just was somebody to talk to, brainstorm with, let go of stress with. She actually found the house online when it just appeared, one of the only 3-bedroom affordable houses in St. Paul, and then texted the mom right away. We just did a house blessing. But I watched what a difference it made if somebody who was appropriate, who didn't see themselves coming in on the white horse, but saw this as a 2-way learning relationship, makes such a difference. And the family made a difference in her life. And I wonder if adopting families after some really good training might be somebody to talk to, somebody to just relieve that stress with, brainstorm with, might be helpful for families. And I know it's complex.
I think that's a wonderful idea and something that we could definitely bring back and look at, and maybe even on a small scale attempt to do, or maybe even focus on one school, family by family. It could be really helpful. I agree with you, and thank you for sharing.
Thanks so much. I'll be very brief because I see excellent questions coming up in the chat too. This is directed to Ms. Abrams. So our American Indian Youth Enrichment out of school time program is very dependent on effective parent engagement. And we actually were able to get funding from 3M to study the effectiveness of the program. And Nicole Martin-Rogers, who you might know and is, I think, chair of the St. Paul Children's Collaborative, was the evaluator with Michael Patton on that study. And it said that this getting rooted in your own culture with faculty from your own culture builds a kind of resilience that you don't get in any other way and benefits the kids in the long run. But the kids' ability to be in the out of school time programming is dependent on the parents understanding that. So we're doing a lot of work with parent engagement for the American Indian community. I think Jackie Turner once told me we're serving like 75% of the American Indian kids in that age group in St. Paul. And so if we can work together to bolster those efforts, we'd be so grateful.
Oh, no, absolutely. And we have one of our parent advisory council. We have my colleague, Dominic Goodbuffalo, who is that connection between American Indian families and the school district. And I can send you his contact information too, but that's his role. That's what he's doing. That's who he's pulling out to meet with families, to work with that population who's oftentimes missed, to bring about the exact things that you're referring to. So I think that it would be a great idea for you guys and Dominic to get connected.
Thanks so much.
Yep, for sure.
I just wanted to put a spotlight on it.
Oh, absolutely.
Lift it up.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Sarah, you have questions in chat?
We do. Shauna asked a question about intentional work being done to address the mental health and trauma of the pandemic and the many transitions of our students, taking the time necessary and not just right into the academics.
Yeah, Reverend Horn, thank you for that question. I mean, and this is an emotional one for me because, you know, not only were we going through the aftermath of a strike and the start of a pandemic, but the murder of George Floyd, and feeling so helpless to address, you know, it puts you in a very vulnerable and a desperate space, almost like what you're saying. We want to do more, you know, ramp that up by 100%. And it was just it continues to be a hard time. You know, the reason I was a little bit late coming into the Zoom today is because we're talking about, with the trial of the officers coming up, what are we going to do proactively to reach out and support? So it is heavy on my mind. I'll also share with you a couple other anecdotes. The tragic murders of babies on the East Side just a couple months ago were families that had siblings in our schools. And it's hard to read and react, and for us, and yet we have young people and families who are there and present. And I was so grateful, and John Broderick knows this because he asked me about it. We had teachers reaching out directly to families who had relationships with the mom, and in the one case anyway. And I was just very heartened and not surprised to learn that because of that relationship already established, that there could be some ongoing support. And then I'll also share with you, if you ask me, you know, Joe, what are you most happy about with being back in person? Well, I'm not happy about this, but I do wonder about it. In the first weeks back, I can already share with you, we have situation reports where information that happens throughout the district through our security and emergency management, I get updates on all of those. And I purposely get them because I want to know what's going on in the district. And we have already had several reports of sexual abuse taking place in the home that's been reported at school. And when you think about the isolation and you think about the lack of human connection, you think about all those reports that might go unfound. You know, I went home to my so those are the things that I deal with.
Thank you, Superintendent Gothard. I know it's a hard time. You've got me choked up.
But I will say that we have a great student support team that has been very thoughtful in providing toolkits to staff, to leaders. You know, we're working really hard to shift our focus of what we've done traditionally for social emotional work and making sure that it's culturally responsive, understanding that there are many different needs, expectations within cultures. And there's wonderful and great diversity within diverse groups too. And I think that's something we forget. I should use an I statement, sometimes tend to think that all members of this group need and want the same thing, and that's just wrong. We really have to get in and understand each individual family, student, and try to meet the needs as best we can.
Wonderful. Thank you.
If I could just jump in just for
Yeah.
a second, I think that, we're in an environment that none of us has ever experienced before. And I think that the opportunity that's created by that is that information is flowing in directions that we didn't necessarily know or understand. District staff can do the things that district staff can do through the relationships that district staff have. Teachers who have those relationships, building leadership, administrators, paraprofessionals. And I think what's important about these kinds of conversations, and I think the role that you and the members of your community have, is that there are social emotional needs that district staff may not be aware of, but your folks or you and your congregation or you personally learn about. And you're sort of like, what do I do with this information? And how do I sort of take it to other places so that something constructive can happen with this? That may mean a feedback loop from you to the district to say, obviously there are confidentiality and other issues, but to sort of highlight maybe opportunities for district staff to be able to know things, again, with opportunities that sort of can be protected of confidentiality, but to be able to say, hey, this is something that we are aware of, that we want you to be aware of so that you can respond in ways that are different. I think we have to think about communication and the way that we can use these kinds of communication tools and individualized ones to make that easier, because we're not going to have students and all the students in the buildings at one time to do the things that staff might have been able to pick up before, and that could have check tested that. So we need eyes and ears in more places, and that's not going to just be St. Paul Public School staff. It's the community. I mean, we are collectively responsible for ourselves and for everybody.
I'm watching the time, Jared, just real quick. So do you got a quick one? As he laughs. Hey, Jared, why don't you throw it in the chat and I will send it out to the panelists and we'll get it back to you. How's that sound? Do you want to throw the question or go for it?
If I could just throw the question out and you guys can let I think it's really for those of us who are faith leaders, and to pick up on what Steve said, and actually Superintendent Goddard, what you were talking about in terms of the number of issues that are coming to the fore as we reopen schools. I guess the question I have as a clergy person, I listen regularly to my parishioners. I've got friends who are educators, and all the fellow parents out there that my kids are talking to their kids. I'm talking to the parents, and I hear a lot because my community is a largely privileged and white insulated group about reasons that folks in my community think schools ought to reopen. And I hear a lot of white families and parents saying, well, we got to do this because communities of color and because of naming all these different issues that schools can answer if we could just reopen them. But it seems sometimes like it's a veiled way of talking about my own needs are to get my kids out of the house and get them back to school. But I'm putting a patina of how I can help others by doing it. And I guess what it highlights to me as I listen to you all talk about the challenges we're facing, these are not new challenges, but they're amplified challenges by the pandemic, of how we expect, just like we do with police, we expect schools to solve all the problems. You just talked about the biggest success of this pandemic was the meal distribution. Now, like just sunset the idea that we're talking about education for a moment, and that would seem really great, but we're talking about schools, and the greatest success is meal. It should be celebrated, and yet it seems on some level to hit the elevation of absurdity that we expect schools to be the food solution for our families. And I guess the question I have embedded in all of this is, what do you all, could you recommend, would you guide clergy who have the ear, sometimes as prophets, sometimes as advocates, sometimes as pastor who is gently guiding people to the right pastures? Like, what are the messages that we could be speaking so that we're not pointing our finger out, look at how the teachers aren't willing to go back, or look what the school district is doing, and realize what Steve just said, that sort of we're all, as King argued, are webbed together in mutuality, and our our success depends upon each other. What are the messages we can be preaching from the pulpit that would assist you in maybe taking the pressure off or pointing towards our policymakers and our leaders? How can we be of help in that way too?
I'd be curious to know what my colleagues and board members feel about this. But Jared, first of all, thank you. I will start just by saying that, through the hardest times that I've been involved in the past, and it's been 3.5 really hard years leading this district. It has. And I don't complain about that. I knew it was going to be hard. It's been really challenging. But almost any group I've met with face to face or been a part of where we can listen, understand, whether it be on Zoom or in person at a church here at the district, it's been positive. I feel heard. I feel valued. I feel like there were some suggestions how we can even come together and do our work better. So I think convening when you have groups like that, inviting me or others in would be really helpful. And I'll meet with somebody one-to-one, and I'll meet with large groups if that's necessary. And again, I have found that to be really helpful. People really care in St. Paul, want to be heard, want to feel valued, and feel like they can contribute to the overall good of everyone. Colleagues, I'll open it to you.
I was also going to say, when I was asked the question before on how we get information out, I would welcome the opportunity to be able to share information that's coming out, because you all have a captive audience at minimum once a week. And so what's important to us is that we are getting valid, authentic information out to our families, because the telephone changed. Somebody says one thing and it ends up changing into something totally different. So for me, and I know for everyone, it's getting accurate information out to people. No matter what that information might be, it needs to be correct. And so obviously there's going to be many more ways to help, but I'm saying that one piece is so huge as another avenue to get information out to parents that we might otherwise miss. And so that's a huge piece coming from the clergy. Once we start moving forward, because I know upcoming, we're going to be having budget meetings and that kind of thing, that again, to grab that audience so that they're a part of, whether we are just trying to get information from stakeholders, or we want your opinion, or we want you to help us make a decision. Having our community input is so important. And so for us to have the relationships with the different faith-based folks, that's huge for us. That's huge for us. And so I would like to see us even strengthen that even further, because we all got the same kids. Remember, I keep saying they're all our kids, whether they're in your church, synagogue, whatever, mosque, they're our kids when we're in school. So we gotta do that whole approach, and we truly are in it together.
We are. Thank you, Dana. We will share contact information between everyone. Blair, I saw that you shared your email, but we'll make sure, Ms. Abrams, I will get you some updated contact lists. I can definitely do that. So we will be in touch in the next several days. Jen, I will send the question to the group and get back to you. It's a great question. I know you're doing a lot of hard work over there. So I just want to say thank you. But before I do that, we've got there's a new partnership between Interfaith Action and our work with Commissioner Harrington. Some of you have been invited to join some COVID-19 calls, which turned into some racial justice calls around the murder of George Floyd. Now with the trial of Derek Chauvin, we are working on getting a call coming up on Thursday, March 4th. We're still working out the details, but we'll make sure that you all are invited, as well as faith leaders in St. Paul, to get an update from Commissioner Harrington and Nicole, his community engagement person. But again, those details are slowly coming together, but kind of mark that afternoon. I believe it's 2:30 on Thursday, March 4th, for that Zoom call with Commissioner Harrington. Knowing that we are in this together, and as the community of St. Paul, we want to be ready and prepared for some of the things that they know what's going on. Again,
And Sarah, I think it's
yes.
I think it's 2:00.
Is it 2? Thank you for checking.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. you will get those details as soon as I get them from the Department of Public Safety's office. So thank you for staying a little later. We appreciate the partnerships with the school board, Superintendent Gothard and Dana, and board members. We appreciate you. Steve, I appreciate you taking these last couple of days of your time with us. Thank you. We did record this to share. We had a lot of faith leaders interested but not able to join us, so we will share that with everyone. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. Go enjoy some sunshine and the warmer weather. So thank you all.